Welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. This show is heard on WBCQ The Planet every Tuesday and Thursday evenings at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is also heard on Podomatic.com, which is an online place where we just upload the programs. There's an archive of a number of our shows, so please visit that as well as follow it, and you'll be notified when new programs are uploaded. And you could also get these on our YouTube channel, Camp Constitution. And when you visit the channel, please subscribe. We are well over 1 million views at this point, and we should have 5,000 subscribers, and we're averaging about 190 to 200 a month, and we hope that keeps growing. Anyway, lots to talk about, but I'd like to mention something that the Presidential Commission on Climate Security, I should say the proposed Commission on Climate Security, and just early last week, Mr. Myron Ebell of the Competitive Enterprise Institute asked us, and this would be mainly thanks to Professor Willie Soon's influence, but asked us if we would sign on to this letter to the President urging him to support this Commission on Climate Security, which would be led by we're suggesting that Mr. William Happer become the head of this, and it would be staffed by people who are climate realists for the most part and not prone to make exaggerated claims and scary scenarios of the world coming to an end in 12 years unless we spend $100 trillion grounding all the planes and getting out of our cars and putting wind turbines for half the country, and what the other half, of course, solar panels. So anyway, I'm going to read the letter. It's not that long, but it's very well done, and I'll just mention some of there's several hundred signatories, mostly individuals with their organizations endorsing. Dear President Trump, the undersigned organizations and individuals write to express our strong support for the proposed President's Commission on Climate Security. It is our understanding that this commission, which is being planned and would be directed by Mr. William Happer of the National Security Council staff, is currently being considered by your senior White House staff and relevant cabinet secretaries and agency heads. The commission will consist of a small number of distinguished experts on climate-related science and national security. They would be charged with conducting an independent, high-level review of the Fourth National Climate Assessment and other official reports relating to climate and its implications for national security. Its deliberations would be subject to the transparency requirements of the Federal Advisory Committees Act. In our view, an independent review of these reports is long overdue. Serious problems and shortcomings have been raised repeatedly in the past by highly qualified scientists, only to be ignored or dismissed by the federal agencies in charge of producing the reports. Among major issues that have been raised and that we hope the Commission will scrutinize, the models used have assumed climate sensitivity to CO2 concentrations significantly higher than recent research warrants. The models have been predicted much more warming than has actually occurred. Predictions of the negative impacts of global warming have been made based on implausible high-end emissions scenarios. The positive impacts of warming have been ignored or minimalized, and surface temperature data sets have been manipulated to show more rapid warming than has actually occurred. An underlying issue that we hope the Commission will also address is the fact that so many of the scientific claims made in these reports and by many climate scientists are not falsifiable. That is, they cannot be tested by the scientific method. The conclusions and predictions made by these reports are the basis for proposed energy policies that could cost trillions of dollars in less than a decade and tens of trillions of dollars over several decades. Given the magnitude of the potential cost involved, we think that taking the insular process of official consensus science on trust, as has been the case for the past 3 decades, is negligent and imprudent. In contrast, major engineering projects are regularly subject to the most rigorous and exhaustive adversarial review. We suggest that climate science requires at least the same level of scrutiny as engineering employed in building a bridge or a new airplane. We note that defenders of the climate consensus have already mounted a public campaign against the proposed commission. We find this opposition curious. If the defenders are confident that the science contained in official reports is robust, then they should welcome a review that would finally put to rest the doubts that have been raised. On the other hand, their opposition could be taken as evidence that the scientific basis of the climate consensus is in fact highly suspect and cannot withstand critical review. We further note that opponents of the proposed commission have already stooped to make personal attacks on Dr. Happer. Many signers of this letter know Dr. Happer personally and are all familiar with his scientific career. We know him to be a man of high capabilities, high achievements, and the highest integrity. It has been reported that some officials within your administration have proposed an internal working group as an alternative to this independent commission, subject to FACA. Insofar as the internal working group would consist of federal career scientists reviewing their own work, we think this alternative would be worse than doing nothing. Although an independent commission of distinguished scientists would have high credibility, we do not mean to imply that its report should be the end of the matter. We therefore suggest that the National Academies of Science and Engineering would be appropriate bodies to conduct an initial review of the Commission's report. Mr. President, you have made a number of comments in recent years expressing doubts about the global warming consensus. Many of the signers of this letter have been similarly skeptical. Without prejudging the results, we think that a review of climate science produced by an independent, high-level commission would be a fair test for your views and ours. Either it would provide a sound basis for revising your views, or it would confirm your views and confound your critics. For these reasons, we urge you to create, by executive order, a President's Commission on Climate Security. Thank you for considering our views. And it's signed Myron Ebell, Director of Center for Energy and Environment, and Mario Lewis, Senior Fellow, Competitive Enterprise Institute, and many, many others, which I can't read, but I'll mention a few. Joe Bast of the Heartland Institute, Thomas Pyle, American Energy Alliance, let's see, Steve Malloy, publisher, Junk Science, and Robert Bradley, CEO of Institute for Energy Research, Eagle Forum, Uni Smith of Eagle Forum, let's see, Al Regnery, Chairman, Conservative Action Project, Bill Walton, Chairman, CNP Action. Then we get Tom DeWeese, our good friend Tom DeWeese, President of the American Policy Center, and Rob Roper of the Ethan Allen Institute, that's in Vermont. Of course, Professor Willie Soon is on there. I see Joe DiLeo, I think, is on there somewhere. Yeah, Joe Bastardi, whom we've interviewed not too long ago. E. Calvin Bessner, who's a friend from Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. Mark Bloch, CEO of Mother Nature's Trading Company. And there's probably several hundred names on this, and it's various distinguished organizations. Vincent Esposito, former Westinghouse Vice President, adjunct professor at University of Pittsburgh, and many, many others. If you'd like to get a copy of this, you can go to our website, campconstitution.net, where you can find this letter, as well as all of the signers of this letter. And then I would suggest you forward it, get it to people in your circles, in your orbit. It was interesting is that this concept of consensus, that science is not consensus. Consensus is where everybody thinks the same way, and you better think the same way. But that's not what science is all about. Science is just the opposite. It defies consensus. It's all about facts. If a million scientists have all believed in the same thing and 2 or 3 had a different opinion, if those 2 or 3 could prove that the consensus is false, that the facts that they are producing or claim to produce are false, then they're all wrong. So it's not like we're voting to see which is right or which is true, and we have an overwhelming number of those who believe. In fact, they claim that something like 95% of the various climate scientists agree that the Earth is warming, and it's because of CO2s. And it's very fascinating too that, well, who are these 95%? There is a Professor Arthur Robinson, who's a scientist, a distinguished scientist. He's the head of Access to Energy. He created a petition, or basically a group of scientists who disagree, and this is just in the United States, and there's over 30,000 scientists from various disciplines. And they'll say, oh, no, they're all tools of big oil. In fact, these folks who sign this cannot be part of big oil, cannot be getting money from big oil. or mouthpieces for big oil. Just the opposite is true. And there are scientists in every single state in the country. And these people are hard scientists. They're not political scientists. They're not psychologists. These people are, some type of hard earth science. And the word climate science, Willie Soon gave a class last year, even the year before. I think he listed numerous disciplines. So there's no one really that can be a scientist in 100 different disciplines. It's really kind of overwhelming to say how many people call themselves climate scientists are actually true climate scientists. People like Al Gore. Al was not a climate scientist. Now, neither am I. I never professed to be. But I know someone asked me, well, what's your credentials? What's your qualification? Well, I'm 60 years old. That meaning I've lived 60 years on this planet. I've lived in the Northeast, in New England, spent some time in Europe, and I've experienced weather and climate. And we live in an area what's supposed to be hot summers, muggy summers, relatively short, cold winters, early spring is usually cold, et cetera, et cetera. And things haven't changed. There might be a week where the crocuses come early. The crocus flowers bloom sometimes in late February. Sometimes they don't bloom until and they're not even blooming yet. Here it is late March. But it's not the end of the world. So it's telling me that we've had a cold winter and the early spring is cold. Now it's starting to warm up here. I just returned from northern Maine early in the month of March of 2019 and picked up the local paper, and it said that they are experiencing, there were 85 inches of snow above the normal, and the season was long from over, so it's probably well over 100 inches now. They've also experienced record cold. Now, if we're heading into climate change and irreversible global warming, then why would any spot on this planet experience a record cold weather? Why have the Midwest experienced not just a little bit, but serious cold weather, record-breaking temperatures? You think this wouldn't happen if we were warming up? And the other scenario is, why would warming be such a bad thing? We had a medieval warming period in Europe, experienced population increase. There was more food. There was more harvests. People were healthier. Greenland became Greenland because of the medieval warming period. Then we had a mini ice age that lasted up to the 1930s, and the 1930s was one of the hottest decade in the United States. And you can just check the weather for yourself and see the temperatures. Had nothing to do with CO2s. And actually CO2 is an important greenhouse gas. It's what some call the poor man's fertilizer. And you could look at that CO2 has been responsible for the greening or the regreening of our planet. And it's something that's vitally needed. So I think it's so important that that this narrative gets out. Now, the encouraging thing is that various organizations have taken polls pretty much around the United States and the English-speaking world and Europe and so forth, and they'll ask, list what you think are the most important issues. And while pollution is definitely something that people are concerned about, rightly so, climate change is like 18 to 19 on a list of 20. So with all the propaganda coming out in academia, in the mass media, and these politicians like Bernie Sanders and Cory Booker and AOC and Al Gore and on, they're not really seeming to have. They seem to have a lot of impact in the government schools, but beyond that, it's not as overwhelming as we would think. But it's important that we continue to work to expose this. And I encourage people who listen to the show, go to our YouTube channel, and you can just go to our Willie Soon playlist or our Lord Monckton playlist, and you'd have some great ammunition. You gather the facts up and some great ammunition to use against the warmers. And I would say that most of these warmers are people that are sincere. They actually believe this to be happening. And in a way, it's hard to blame them that, they've listened to these scary scenarios and, my goodness, we better do something. It's interesting. It was several years ago. I was with my son up in Maine, in Waterville, Maine. It was I think it was a junior college, and they had some symposium on climate change and what have you. And we were out there with our Stop Agenda 21 signs and such. And one of the attendees came out, and he was a very sincere guy, probably in his my age, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger. And he was so concerned that the state of Maine would be a refugee for climate people fleeing the southern states, that we had to prepare the infrastructure for this. And this guy was sure, and he said, well, I live on coastal Maine. And he was very respectful, by the way. He wasn't calling me names, tool of big oil or anything like that. He said, I grew up in coastal Maine, and I remember the winters we used to have so much snow, and now we don't have the snow we used to have, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this is just anecdotal evidence. And if you actually did a search, and of course sometimes you have the land usage has changed. They may have put a building near where the snow would drift, or things of this nature that have maybe the snow has not been as dramatic, but it's got nothing to do with CO2s. And it's quite interesting is when you check these out. And for example, I might say, oh, gee, I remember we used to have the snow used to be up to my waist when I was a kid. Well, sure, that was only 3 feet or 3.5 feet, so 4 feet or what have you. So of course the snow is going to seem hot, like there's more. But if you simply do a record of annual snowfall, we've had some winters where we've had lots of it. We have some winters where there was not a whole lot. It had nothing to do with CO2s. Some cases we've had colder winters but less snow. Back here in Boston, we had, I think it was about 4 years ago, we had record-breaking snow, I think 3 or 4 snowstorms in a row, like every weekend, each one leaving 1.5 feet or so, even more. And we had a mountain of snow piled in front of my wife runs a daycare business, so we have to clear out everything. We can't just make a little path. And we need the driveway open up, and we had a gigantic mountain. It was all done by my son and I, just piling the snow up. And it all melted, and we weren't hitting an ice age. And then we had, that year we had a nice summer, a nice warm summer. And life went on, and that's just the way it is. This year in New England, I should say in greater Boston, we didn't have as much snow as we had. I think we only had one, what I'd call a major snowstorm, leaving a little over 1 foot. We had a number of times where we had a few inches here, 6 inches there, but we still had our share of it. It wasn't in large snowstorms where all the schools are closed and the public transportation's been shut down. But the rest of New England, I just returned, as I mentioned, from Maine, but last week I was up in northwestern New Hampshire, and everybody's on their ski mobiles. There's still ice fishing. So, yeah, record cold in that area, too. So, again, I think it's very important for us, if you're a liberty activist, to open your mouth, let people know about this. Learn some of the facts. You don't have to be a walking encyclopedia. You don't have to be a scientist with 1,000 degrees from various colleges to speak coherently on the subject. But what you do is just, ask people questions who believe this. Why do you believe this? What if you're wrong? Where are you getting your information from? If you're getting it from Mother Jones, it may not be the most credible source. So these are the things that we ask folks, start thinking for yourself, man. Look into these issues and start thinking. Go beyond Huffington Post or your daily online newspaper source like the Boston Globe. And one of the interesting things, one of the tragic things, is that young children, school-age children, are being used on school time to lobby on behalf of these various carbon tax initiative, tax bills, proposed bills. Here in Massachusetts, some students from Attleboro High School, public high school, Attleboro's in the southeast part of Massachusetts. It borders Rhode Island. And a teacher took his students into the State House and worked with the state senator and a state rep who were sponsoring these dangerous, stupid carbon tax bills. And they were very proud of it. And I got a hold of the state ethics committee, and I said, this should lodge a complaint, because I know quite well that if that teacher was there lobbying to repeal gun control bills or pro-life bills, that there would have been a backlash. The left would be local newspaper that refused, to say much about it, said nothing about it, wouldn't even run my letter complaining about it, because they support it. But they would be screaming for resignations and demanding apologies had it been a teacher who was conservative, which there are a few in these public schools or government schools, but not too many. It just shows you the blatant hypocrisy of the left. Wouldn't even respond to a letter, to my letter, wouldn't even respond. And the State Ethics Commission, when I spoke to a person at the well, I don't know if we violated, let me check into it. We're not going to check into it because that's the narrative. That's what they want. It is good to see that some of these climate carbon tax bills are not meeting much success. In Maine, just a few weeks ago, it's actually early March, they had a hearing, and I think everybody except there was hundreds of people showed up. The place was packed, and the hearings went on late into the night. And of all the people, only 2 people that testified in favor. And I think one of the sponsors wasn't nowhere to be found, and it's not going to go anywhere. And so even in states with Democrat majorities, it's going to be hard to do because this carbon tax. I'm not sure what they are specifically proposing. I just got a glance at the bill, but it would have cost each household an extra between $200 to $500 a year, and maybe more. Of course, once they pass a tax, they just keep on raising it as time goes on. But it would have been destroyed the economy of Maine, and it's already a very poor state. As much good that the former Governor LePage has done, it's still a relatively poor state, and the economy is not so great. And and the same thing in New Hampshire. I don't think the one in New Hampshire is going to go anywhere either, and even in Vermont. And here is Vermont, here it is, this beautiful state who has a nice environment, and they're actually going to they want to tax firewood. And, of course, they already tax gasoline. There's federal and state taxes on gasoline. So you can say that's sort of a carbon tax de facto, even though it's not called that. And we've had that tax for years. It's supposed to support the highways and roads, et cetera, et cetera. So we got about 7 or 8 minutes left. I want to talk a little bit about our homeschool show experience and something that Maine Governor Mills has refused to do. Now, Camp Constitution has information tables. We visit various events with our information tables, and sometimes we're guest speakers at these events as well. And we've over the years, we've actually participated at 4 homeschool shows, actually 5, one in New York, one in New Jersey, one in Maine, one in Massachusetts, and the last 2 years, and then this year will be the 3rd year, is the CHAPS, the Christian Homeschools of Pennsylvania's annual show. And so this year, and these events, well, the one in New Jersey has since been canceled, and the one in New York also does not, because of they had trouble getting vendors. But these other 3 shows are still very vibrant. The Homeschools of Maine usually has their convention right on the first weekend of spring, and we are very well received there. And we just came back from that convention. And every year, I can remember, now I was going there prior to Camp Constitution's creation with another organization, and then the last maybe, 5 or 6 or so years under the guise of Camp Constitution. And on display at the table of the Homeschools of Maine is, as you sign in, there's a little table there with all information about this fine group, would be a proclamation signed by the governor setting aside the first week in May as homeschool week. It has the whereases and therefore be it resolves. And since 1988, this has happened. So in 1988, you've had Democrat governors, you've had independent Angus King, who was a left-wing governor, and you've had Paul LePage, who served 2 terms. So you've had Democrat, Republican, and independent governors that have routinely signed this petition. But Governor Janet Mills, she is the new governor, just sworn in January. She refused to sign it. And she said something to the effect that, well, I don't want to sign a resolution for an organization for this, something like this. It doesn't really add up to much. There aren't that many homeschoolers, so it's not enough people to really justify a resolution or a proclamation. Well, when I heard that, I did a little research. It doesn't take much. I just went online and said Governor Mills' proclamation and discovered that the very first proclamation she signed wasn't for a large organization. It was for one individual, gentleman that had been with the Game and Wildlife Fisheries, George Smith, I believe his name is. Anyway, it's on our blog I posted yesterday on our website, so you get that information. There's a picture of her giving the proclamation to this one person. But look at the Maine homeschoolers. It is estimated that there are 6,000 students that are homeschooling. Now, this would be children of school age, 5 or whatever the state law requires, 5 to 16. That doesn't include the parents, and most of these families, if not all of them, are from two-parent households. And their younger children that not yet to be homeschooled but will be, and their older children who have graduated from the homeschool program but are still involved with the program. And then you have parents whose children have grown up, graduated from homeschooling, but are still involved in some capacity. They might belong to a homeschool group or teach a class at one of these homeschool groups or participate in the convention. Lots of people at the convention are older people, but they're still, their kids have grown, but they're still involved in the homeschooling school community. So that actually is quite a lot. Now we're talking over 20,000 people in the state with a relatively small population, and she wouldn't sign it. So the Homeschoolers of Maine put together a petition, which you can find on our camp blog. It was posted yesterday. I interviewed Isaiah, one of the gentlemen that put together the petition, and you can look at the video. You can also go to the Homeschoolers of Maine's website and sign the petition online. So we're hoping that they will, the governor will relent. And even if she doesn't, there's got to be some pushback here. We don't need a proclamation from the governor for a homeschool week, but the attitude of people like Mills is that homeschoolers are bad because they are not being conditioned by the government education institutions or the government indoctrination centers, and we should discourage homeschooling at all costs. It is interesting to note that there are a number of people on the left that homeschool. I would say that the numbers of Christian conservative homeschoolers is much, much larger. I don't know the exact breakdown. I might guess 90-10, but I'm not certain about that. Just been my observations. But we just need to push back. And again, if this was the Gay and Lesbian Homeschoolers Association, I am certain that Governor Mills, not only would she have signed the proclamation, but she would have been the guest speaker at the conference. So, all right, well, we got a minute left. I want to thank you for listening to our show. And I also want to encourage those who listen to the show on a regular basis or hearing it for the first time to help us financially. We are a charitable trust. We rely on the generosity of those who support Camp Constitution. People who, and some people support us with donations of funds. We have a PayPal account, and you go to our website, campconstitution.net, and you can make a one-time donation. And we would prefer a monthly recurring donation, even if it's $2 or $5 a month. All the people that are listening to this show, either on YouTube or WBCQ The Planet or Podomatic, if they helped just a little bit, we could expand our outreach. We could, if we could do that, we would be as active as we are and as influential as we are, we would be far more influential. So please help us with a donation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to call me, get a hold of me. You can find me right on the website, campconstitution.net. You can call me directly at 857-498-1309. And with that, I want to thank you. And until next week, may God richly bless you.